Hello, beautiful people, and welcome. Yeah, I think we're not gonna make this into a video. Actually, I think if I'm gonna make a like generic Ask Zajef into a video, I'm gonna like make a community post on YouTube before I record it, so that YouTube people can actually catch it. Hi, to the first general slash generic Ask Zajef that is not character specific in like probably years. It's been a very long time since I last did one of these. It's been a very long time since I last did one of these, and I figured it was time. I had let the people wait long enough. Am I using this as an opportunity to procrastinate on beta calcs until next patch when they're gonna change things again, so that I don't waste my time? Maybe, perhaps, maybe, perhaps, maybe, perhaps, maybe. But you'll never know for sure. Is it still worth to get early Mualani constellations for a long time free-to-play account with no cons or limited characters for a strong carry? I already have C0. So Mualani, as like a way to get one relatively strong vertically invested team on an account, can be good. It depends on a lot of factors. If you're a long-time player, a lot of the upsides from Mualani might matter a little bit less to you, right? When you look at Dolphin Mualani stuff, one of the biggest upsides is that Mualani's strongest teams don't rely on other 5-stars, which is great for limiting the cost of the teams, right? The amount of 5-stars you're using. And she also isn't reliant on 4-stars that have very important C6s. But if you're an older player, if you have a lot of characters already, then that upside is mitigated because you might just have those other 5-star characters available anyways. I'd say that as a general rule, if you already have a bunch of different teams, going for Mualani cons isn't necessarily better than going for any of the other new stuff, really. Mualani and Mawika, because they have, like I said, teams that are comprised of no other real limited 5-star characters at like their, if you want to cost max, they have good teams with only 4-star characters. I mean, I guess in Mualani's case there's Mona, but like she's a standard, so it's a little different. When you're comparing teams with say the same amount of 5-stars, like including constellations, Mualani and Mawika will look really good. But if you are starting from an account that already has a bunch of stuff at C0, right? Then the amount of wishes you need to put into a team to make it reach a certain level, I mean, some of that cost has already been paid, basically, right? And so at that point, is going for early investment on Mualani better than going for early investment on the other characters that you already have multiple 5-stars for? And generally, the answer to that is, like, not necessarily. Other than, like, maybe Flynn's, pretty much all of the characters released since the start of Nodcry have access to some pretty significant power boosts with, like, somewhere between 1 and 3 extra cost on the team. And, again, right, if you're starting from having all the 5-stars for the team, so it costs you the same to get 2 or 3 extra costs, generally, you'd be able to make stronger teams with those than with Mualani. But then the question becomes, like, are you able to do that? Or do you need to, like, actually split your teams so that you need to make sure that you have, like, enough functional teams? So maybe you can still go for Mualani because she doesn't have too much overlap with other units. She does have some, right? Sucrose certainly is Sucrose. But, yeah. It's definitely a consideration. And it can be good. And it can still be good, very much so. But just remember that when you look at cost maxing stuff, right? What the standardized ways in which you compare teams are never going to be accurately representing the situation of your account. You know, half of the accounts are better than the average account, and half of the accounts are worse. And there's almost no accounts that are exactly at what any standard is going to assume. So it really just depends on what teams you have. But Mualani's like a fine one. Definitely still a competitive one, but not the best. She's also a pain in the ass to play, so personally I don't recommend it. But oh well. Right, next question. How much of the DPS increases the iansan constellations? That depends a lot. Iansan's constellations, like there's two. Okay, obviously there's just the outright numbers on them, right? You get the 3 talent levels on this, which takes the buff from 690 to 810, and you get the extra 30% attack. But, and I guess like maybe this 25 damage percent as well. But there are 2 additional factors on top of these numbers increases that can make the constellations more impactful in some teams. One, the C4, which gives you more front-loaded Night Soul generation. So in teams where you don't move a lot, you will average higher Night Soul, and you will manage to stay above 42 Night Soul for longer. And the C6 3-second duration is actually a really big deal in some teams. At minimum, what you're getting is, let's say in a Mawika team, a Mel Mawika team, right? Mawika is what, 356, 359? I forgot. 359, I think, base attack. I don't remember if it's 359 and 356. I think it's 9. So you're getting main stat. Maybe you're going EM main stat. Power Resonance for passive. Substats. Noblesse. TTDS. Half uptime. Something like that. Then flat, you've got like this. You've got Bennett. And then you got iansan. Damage percent, she's got like 35 average from her passive, 46.6, 15 from Codex, 15 from Bennett C6, let's say, 40 from Cinder City, Serpent Spine, sure. Yeah. Just looking at in terms of stats, from C0 to C6 is generally around. Like it depends like for the specifics, right? Sometimes you don't have full uptime on the damage percent. Sometimes you have more external buffs or less external buffs. But it's generally gonna be like somewhere between 15 and 25%. Increase just in terms of numbers without looking at duration increases. From C2, it's a lot less than that. It's, you know, more between 10 and 20. But it's still a pretty big deal. But yeah, and then it can be a lot more than that in teams that benefit from this duration a lot. So for example, in Hex Mawika, you don't have a choice. You have to use iansan right after Mawika. Right? Otherwise your setups don't work. Which means that if you don't have C6 iansan, iansan's burst duration will run out very early into your uptime. Yeah, another thing, 3 extra seconds for Mawika specifically means that you are spending Night Soul for 3 seconds longer, which means more fighting spirit if you're playing Mawika in a team that only has 2 Natlan units, including Mawika and iansan, right? Nothing else. Basically, in the like extreme cases, it can be like 40, maybe even more % damage increase, because the just pretty relatively big numbers buff are compounding with the duration increase, making everything just matter a lot more. But sometimes it can be as low as like 15-ish% as well. It really depends on the team. All right, next question. Chad, don't ask questions about Columbina. We'll do a dedicated Columbina Ask Zajef. What are your thoughts on going deep, vertical, and flexible strong carries like Mawika or like, you know, Skirk, etc., solely for consistent dire? I mean, it's definitely something you can do. I think how good of an idea depends on how fast the power creep is gonna go in Nogcry, right? If what I am like hoping will be the case does happen, which is that they just front loaded a lot of the power creep, and that the teams won't actually get that much stronger, at least until Tsaritsa comes out, and then when Tsaritsa comes out, it's not gonna be like an insane upgrade to every team because I'm kind of expecting her to be a carry, right? So if that's what ends up happening, then maybe that. But if the rate of the power creep is just gonna follow what happened in Nogcry, except we're just starting this high, then God, like Malika is gonna be fucking C tier a year from now. It's yeah. And so I'm really not entirely sure. I'll say that the one nice thing about Mawika specifically, I guess it's not just Mawika. Honestly, all three of those units definitely have room for improvement in their team. Mawika has like iansan that's really good, and Sitlali sometimes, but Sitlali, I mean, I talked about it a lot. I think in a recent video, but some of Sitlali's power budget went into the Chrono application, and because of the combos from Mawika, the speed of Sitlali's Chrono application leaves a little bit to be desired. Which means that Sitlali actually is forcing you to do worse combos. And Mawika is a unit that, thanks to those combos, isn't really as attached to Melt as we initially thought she would be on release. So, Mawika definitely has room for improvement in her teams by just either giving a Sitlali replacement, giving a Sitlali helper, like a second cryo unit, or an Animo unit that applies a bunch of off-field cryo that isn't a pain in the ass to set up. To make the Melt teams have access to the better combos without needing to sacrifice a team slot just for cryo application the way they do now. Right? You can play double cryo Mawika right now with Escoffier, and it is actually one of her better teams. But Escoffier ain't doing shit. She's just applying cryo. So if we get a cryo unit that's actually good for the slot, then like even the Melt teams could go up in double cryo. For Arlecchino, I'd say it's a little bit harder to improve her because she doesn't have that issue for Melt. Like, technically, Arlecchino does have the fucking walk cancel and swap stuff with Sitlali abominations, but it's not actually that big of a deal. I'd say that Arlecchino is pretty close to the height of her powers, at least looking at supports that aren't just outright power creep. I don't think we're gonna get like realistic. Okay, how do I properly convey this idea? In order for for Arlecchino to get an improvement to her teams, the new support would need to be better than the other supports we have. A support that's as good but fulfills a function that Arlecchino's team currently is looking for wouldn't really help because none of the slots in Arlecchino's teams are like falling behind, redundant, or like not that good. Unironically, in Mawika teams, you're a little bit annoyed by the fact that, you know, the two best stab buffers you can give her are both attack buffers. So we would need to have a unit that is stronger than the units that are already considered good for the Arlecchino teams to really move up. I don't think that's the case for Mawika, and I don't think that's the case for Skirk either. Like, I'd say that looking at like what they've been doing with supports lately, it's put Skirk's kit, it's recontextualized Skirk's kit a little bit for me. And I think really, like, right now, Skirk is being held back by her supports just not being that great. She has one great support for her team, but that's kind of it. Like, Farina is just really not it, man. And yeah, also, Escoffier isn't as good as she was on release either. But that's a lot more fixable. Like, Escoffier's shortcomings right now are that a portion of her power budget is in personal damage, and she doesn't actually get to build personal damage all that much because of Farina's fucking burst tax. You need to build the R in Escoffier because of Farina. You need to have her on Fav because of Farina. So once Farina gets replaced in that team, Escoffier's damage goes up just from not having to burst anymore. And then if she's replaced with a unit that gives a team-wide buff that Escoffier cares about, that can also be good. Yeah, that's fair. Her signature weapon buffs on burst, so maybe they won't replace Farina. But... And then obviously the Skirk last slot thing has always been not that great. I'd say that, like, if we got Cryo or Hydro characters for Skirk teams that were balanced to be on the same level as what we've had recently, Skirk could most definitely come back and become, like, an actual good character again. Shanghai Leo buffs, surely, yeah. In the current meta, is pulling for supports over onfielders still a viable pulling strategy? Yes and no. When you look at Stygian, you're almost always able to do the shill with just the supports for the shill without needing the carry. But it'll often be difficult to do stuff other than the shill by just having the supports for a team. And pulling for every single support core will exhaust your primo gems. I think it's probably a good idea to have, like, one team of every shill archetype. And if you don't particularly like a given shill archetype, you can probably get away with just pulling for the supports. And then, that, like, there's going to be some archetypes that you can skip, right? Like, you don't need to pull for any of the Hex stuff, right? Because the way it does shill, or... There's no, like, actual shill mechanic in Hex. There's no ways that bosses will interact with Hexerai. They'll just interact with the character's kits, and usually there's options. You have options to bypass that. Whereas, like, Lunar and Stellar, and even Night Soul, your options are more limited. But, like, basically, I'd say that getting one, like, full premium team per region is probably a good idea. And if you don't really like any of the characters, but you already have other strong teams, you can probably get away with only going for the supports for the team. But I don't think it's, like, as good of an idea as it used to be. Can you try to simplify how we should think about building characters that have multiple stats as they scale well with, which may change with cons? Example is Yae, Rizli, and Stellar Conduct, since they could want attack and EM Sands or Goblet, and Yae C2 gives EM. I mean, it's kind of difficult to simplify, because, like, it really is just, like, you want your damage number to be as high as it can be, and the best combination of stats is going to be the one that makes your damage number higher. Oh, wow. Crazy. It's kind of difficult to give, like, a shorthand, or a short answer, or simplified answer for it. You kind of just have to... Yeah, you can use the optimizer, you can multiply your stats together and actually figure it out yourself by learning how the formula works. But that's kind of it. But, like, we can explain how the formula works. Specifically for attack and EM and Stellar teams. You have your EM multiplier and your attack, right? Let's say you have, like, 800 EM. Now, when you're calculating down... Or, this is, like, 500 EM, actually. Let's say your what was I saying? I got distracted. All right. When you're trying to calculate the damage, you need to have a bunch of extra factors. You need the crit, you need enemy resistance, you need blah, blah, blah. You don't actually need to do these things when you're just looking at, like, how you need to build the character. Because all of those external factors will multiply these numbers by the same amount. So what you want is you want the Elemental Mastery multiplier times the attack to be as high as possible. Right? And you'll have your EM and you'll have your attack, but you won't have your EM multiplier directly. Your EM multiplier directly has a formula, and the formula is 6 times, for Stellar at least, and Lunar, 6 times Elemental Mastery, divided by 2000 plus Elemental Mastery. That's the increase. So, +1 for the multiplier, right? Plus 100%. So here, our attack is getting multiplied by 2.2 at 500 EM. The thing is, you can't just look at your EM because a lot of these teams have stellar damage buffs. For example, Disenchantment in Deep Shadows gives you 40% stellar conduct damage. Yae's C1, 50%. Chi-Chi, 50%. So you'll have to add these numbers in here, right? And technically, all of this gets multiplied by 1.14 from the passive, but like I said, right, this is a multiplier that applies to the whole thing, so it's not necessary for this at all. And all you need to do to figure out what's better is you just compare your stat line with both. Ish, something like this. Does she have 800 base? It's like 852. So in this case, with these stats, getting an attack sense would be slightly better than getting an EM sense, but only by like 1%. In Stellar specifically, attack and EM are often similar, to the point where your gear is often, like, the best main stat is often decided by the rest of your gear. But it also means that if you have a really good piece, it can be worth running even if it's not necessarily the best main stat, because they're relatively close. But yeah, this is why, like, when you look at Sandrone weapons, generally Mailed Flower is better than Tidal Shadow for free-to-play options, but there are actually situations where Tidal Shadow is better because you have a lot of elemental mastery from your gear or from your team. But yeah, if you don't want to do the calcs yourself, just use the optimizer. It does it for you. I have Yae, but no Rizli, Cyno, or Sandrone. What would you recommend me to do for Stellar Shill content? It's hard to say right now because Cryo MC could be good or could be bad. Supposedly, right now, Cryo MC's burst is not increased by the stacks from the Polestar field. Which means that that extra, like, 40 to 100% multiplicative extra damage is just missing. So, bro is doing, like, a lot less damage than they're supposed to. We don't know if that's a bug or if that's intended. If that's intended and they're not changing it, it'll probably be a little bit difficult to try to do Cryo MC carry. And since if you already have Yae, it could be a good idea to go for Sandrone. Or you could just wait for the next Stellar Conduct carry, which I think is relatively likely going to be a thing. Or, yeah, like, you could just go for Odette. Like, even if Cryo MC doesn't end up being that good, if you have a Yae plus Odette, you're probably kind of fine already. So, I don't think you need to pull for anything in the short term if you're planning on getting Odette. If you're not planning on getting Odette, Yae Cryo MC might not necessarily be enough. I'd be a little bit worried about it. But, I mean, maybe. We'll see. Any advice on how to prep for 7.0? Things like saving artifacts for new strongbox, preforming specific sets, etc. Okay, sure. That's actually a good question. Let's talk about artifact sets first. So, when you look at the, like, support artifact sets, because let's be honest, carry artifact sets that are older are just never being used again. You have, obviously, Celestial Gift. Celestial Gift is a bit weird. It gives damage percent, so it's not going to help the Stellar teams at all. I don't think Stellar is the only archetype we're going to get in Sneznoya. I'm, like, 99% certain that... I mean, I don't know. I'm 100% certain we'll get other stuff, just like how we got Hex stuff in Nodcry. We're supposedly getting Vodyanitsa, who is not a Stellar character in, like, 7.1 or something. So, having a good set for teams that might use Vodyanitsa from this could be useful. But it's not a high priority, I would say, if you're not already using teams that care about it. Obviously, Hex is good. If you're using Hex units on your team, this set is very good. Right? If you're using Hex Malika with Mona, or if you're doing some, like, Durin Nicole stuff, having this set is really good. But if you're not, I don't think you need to pre-farm it for anything. You can just get around to it once they announce that a unit is released that cares about this. I mean, Serenade is very good if you're using the units that want it, if you're using a Nograi team. I will say, Serenade can be useful even if you don't have a Nograi carry. Sometimes enemies will have mechanics that incentivize you to change your teams around. And if you're playing a stellar team and you need to use a unit that is different from your premium team in order to deal with a shill mechanic, even if it's not a Nograi shill, if, say, you need to deal with like elemental application and Yahoda works there, then this set becomes a 60 elemental mastery support set for that team. So I'd say that like having a 4-piece of this that has like ER main stat and like crit rate main stat as well, right, on Sand and Circlet for Fav is probably a good idea. Even if you don't have lunar teams. If you do have lunar teams, obviously you should get this set. But I think getting a 4-piece is good even if you don't. It just doesn't need to be all that good. Cinder City, also kind of just nice to have a set for, even if you're not using it, because the 4-piece can be used in a generalist way. But it's not that important. Other than that, for older sets, it's like Noblesse and TOM and VV, I guess. Noblesse isn't that great, unfortunately. The meta has shifted to a lot of supports not using their bursts, and a lot of carries having field times that don't coincide with Noblesse's 12-second uptime all that well. So I'd say that Noblesse is probably the least important set to farm. You'll see it assumed a lot in Calcs, but it's rarely all that big of a deal to have. TOM, I'd say, is a little bit more important to have, because when it works, it is full uptime, unlike Noblesse. But you also don't really need good artifact quality on TOM most of the time. Again, getting crit rate main stat, ER main stat. Maybe getting crit rate substats as well for Fav proc can be useful. Yeah, Instructor, always good. The VV, we'll have to see if they change VV again over the beta. But, yeah. I'd say that, like, using your artifacts for strongbox on... If you have any carry that uses a set that's in the strongbox and your gear isn't, like, already top 1%, basically, you can't go wrong strongboxing your carry's gear. But keeping enough so that you can strongbox a support set that you don't have, or just strongboxing it now so you have one lying around, is probably a good idea. Yeah, there's not much else to say for prepping for 7.0, honestly. Yeah, also, yeah, I guess that's also an important thing. As a general rule, right? You don't really want to strongbox sets that are coming from domains where you care about getting both of the sets in the domain. If you're gonna need to farm for a VV set and for a Night Sky set, right? Until you have good VV, you shouldn't strongbox Night Sky, because you can spend your resin in the Night Sky domain. And if you get Serenade artifacts, you're okay with that. You do not want to spend your resin getting Maiden's artifacts. Yeah, saving billets for 7.0 can be a good idea, but again, just like VV versus World stuff, it's like, I think, very much still up in the air. Things could change a couple more times in the beta. But having the billets available is always a good idea when you're when a new region is right on the corner. So yeah. Do you think Fav stocks will be going down soon? If they're moving away from supports using bursts to activate their buffs? No. No, I don't think so. Fuck, they even made Fav the battle pass weapon. Like, clearly they want to keep things the way they are. I mean, what they might do, and, you know, I actually didn't think about this before, but I'm realizing it now. They might give literally every enemy shields that prevent Fav from proccing, so that you have to use the battle pass weapon. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Oh, that's not gonna be good. Ah, shit. How do you imagine writing Kid Buff to make her a good character again? I mean, I think the main issue with Raiden, and one of the reasons why Raiden didn't get a buff, is the, like, identity of Electro as an element has kind of changed a bit too much. When you look at, like, early Genshin, and you look at, like, the identity that each element had, right? Hydro was, like, about defensive stuff. Pyro was about, like, big reactions slash buffs. Geo was a joke. Animal was, like, entirely focused on utility, buffs, and grouping. Cryo was, like, enabling reactions mostly. And Electro was all about energy. Right? And Electro, if you look at the Electro units released after 1.0, right? Wait, I didn't even realize we didn't get a single Electro unit between 1.0 and Inazuma. That's crazy. But yeah. Very clearly still energy. Energy. Kind of energy, but, like, not really. Right? Yeah, I can just filter by Electro, you're right. Cookie wasn't all that much about energy. Cyno, kind of a good amount about energy. Sethos, entirely about energy. But after Sethos, they kind of started moving away from Electro being about energy. If they were about energy, it was just because they were units. They were carries that needed bursts like Cyno, I guess, to some extent, right? With Veressa and Flins. But Electro just hasn't been, like, all about energy the same way it was in early Genshin for a while now. And because Raiden's Archons in general tend to, like, encompass the identity of the element, right? Venti, grouping, utility. Maoika, damage, buffs. Farina, like, weird interactions with defensive utility / enabling. Zhongli, I mean, shields, whatever, who cares. Raiden, energy. But with the way that not only Electro units, but units as a whole, recently, have been a lot less focused on using burst, that identity of Electro has kind of lost its purpose. And it's difficult to give a Raiden buff that makes sense with, that is, like, faithful to the identity of the element, that allows her to still feel like an Archon that is, like, the pinnacle of the element, without making it about something other than energy. Right? You don't actually want to be forced to use the bursts of a unit who has a bad burst. Right? Like, let's say, I'm just using Linnea as an example, because Linnea is, like, the unit with the worst burst. But, like, you don't want to be in a situation where you have to use Linnea's burst to get resolve for Raiden, because you need to in order for her to deal a lot of damage. Right? But I feel like if you were to give a buff to Raiden, that's the sort of stuff you'd want to do. And then it would be really weird. Yeah, unironically, I would, if they were to, like, redesign, like, rework buff Raiden, what I would like to see is something kind of similar to Lohan, but without the focus on reactions. Right? Focused on bursts of other characters, rather than reactions of other characters. So, like, but, like, having both buffs for the off-field, as well as increase to her own damage based on the off-field, I think is a good idea. I think that could very well fit with her identity, but make those interactions only function on bursts, not on skills. And then you're also maintaining the elemental, the element, like, the element's identity of Electro being all about energy. Nicole is doing worse Wrio with Raiden fulfilling her identity. I mean, not really. Nicole's burst is, like, one of the worst abilities in the game. And Javerz's burst doesn't do anything. Like, Durin does, but that's it. It's only Durin. Is there any manhwa/anime you'd like Genshin to collab with? No, I do not want the intellectual property. I appreciate to get tainted by Genshin.